One of the things we talk about is what kinds of questions it makes sense to ask your boss. Often, clarity comes not because the senior leader is great at providing it, but because the person the next level down is willing to do, you were exactly right, the work. It's tiring. It takes time. And it means going back to your boss and saying, okay, boss, here's my understanding of what this means.
Hi, my name is Emeka and welcome to Growth is Personal. Each week, I share insights and strategies that will equip you to accelerate your personal and professional growth and bring you conversations that will empower you to thrive in life, career, and business. Okay. Welcome once again to Grow This Personal podcast. I'm excited to be here again. This is going to be our first episode in the month of February, and we're excited to have a phenomenal guest today on the show. For those of us watching on YouTube, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button and drop a comment about what you'll gain from today's episode. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify as well, give us a comment about today's episode, drop a rating, and let us know what you think about our conversation today. Today, we have a phenomenal guest. Her name is Liz Kislik. Liz Kislik is a management consultant and executive coach and a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review and Forbes. Her TEDx, Where There Is So Much Conflict at Work and What You Can Do to Fix It, has received more than 500,000 views. She specializes in developing high-performing leaders and workforces, and for 30 years has helped family-run businesses, national nonprofits, and Fortune 500 companies like American Express, Girl Scout, Staples, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and Highlight for Children solve their thorniest problem. I'm interested about the word thorniest. But well, welcome to the show, Liz. And I know that there are probably some other things about you that I didn't get to talk about in my introduction. So tell us about Liz. Who is Liz? And I'll get our audience across the globe. So tell us, who is Liz and what makes you or how do you solve the thorniest problem? Just give us a little bit of insight.
I think the first thing, I'm so laughing because life is full of thorny problems, and we have them at home and we have them at work. And Emeka, the idea that we shouldn't have problems is what gets in our way. Of course, we're going to have problems. It's part of the human condition. The Buddhists talk about the suffering that really is the stuff of life. And when we're at work, I'm very, very lucky. I have my own company. I do pretty much what I want. It's hard, but it's my choice in ways that are not true for many, many people who work for someone else. And so, of course, when you are working for someone else and you are being paid and you need the money, we need the money to live, the natural human tendencies that create conflict, of course, they're likely to be worse because our survival is part of the question there. Can I survive to come back another day and earn this money to feed my family, take care of my health, have a good life, all of those things? And whenever power is part of the structure of the situation, you're going to have difficult, challenging problems, and we don't know how to talk to each other about them.
Yeah, because one of the for me, moving to Canada, for example, as an immigrant, I've had, and I know most of our audience as well, are people who have traveled around the globe, working in different part of the country that is not their home country, and sometimes navigating the workplace in a new environment can be tough. Um, so for me, conflict is something that I think, like you said, problem. We trying to say that there should be no problem, or avoiding problem in itself is the reason why there's problem. Right. So can you share with me, your personal experience, with workplace conflict, and how have you been able to navigate through it? And I know you say you run your own business, but I know you also interface with different organizations, in the capacity of consulting and stuff. How have you been able to address workplace conflict?
I would say that my answer now, as someone who's been working as long as I have, is very different from what it would have been 30 years ago, because I really can't stand conflict. I mean, I prefer to avoid it myself. It's uncomfortable, and we don't like to feel uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Um, I can't imagine how challenging it must be for an immigrant who has to deal with feeling different and separate, who sometimes does not know the language with the
Hmm.
facility of the people who are already there, who has to learn new customs on top of the strictures of work itself.
Right.
Um, there are many, many ways to be different
Hmm.
that make things harder. As people, we look for others to be like ourselves. And when I was younger, I expected that too. If someone reacted in a way that was not my reaction, I would either wonder what was wrong with them or what was wrong with me. And it took a lot of time and observation to notice that it's not necessarily that anything is wrong.
Hmm.
It's just that we approach situations differently. We see them differently. So, of course, we will have different viewpoints and often different positions. And if we can prevent ourselves from being locked into a position and really see how everybody else is reacting, that will help a lot. So you asked for an example. So let me give you an example. This is one of my favorite examples when I learned about different ways to navigate conflict. And this is really in the context of hierarchical power and authority. So I was a young manager, and I was very privileged. I was able to go to college. I did well. Um, I got a good job right away. Many things were very, very lucky for me. And I didn't have expectations of failure. I had expectations of success.
Yes. Hmm.
So I really progressed well because, like nature, I always abhorred a vacuum. So when I saw work that wasn't being done, I would just start to do it and try to make things go well. And so I progressed. I got promotions very quickly, and I was young, but I was already fairly senior. And I was in a meeting with a peer and two more senior executives. And this peer was responsible for a project that he was not taking care of. It was not going well. And the two senior executives were questioning him. And he was saying some stuff that we all knew probably wasn't accurate. But instead of saying to him, look, just tell us what's going on and we'll figure it out together, they picked at him, you know, the way people do to show when someone is mistaken or doing something wrong, and almost like a setup.
Hmm.
So they were really going after him. And he was therefore saying more things that weren't true to try to protect himself, as people often do. And I just couldn't stand it. So I interrupted and asked the two senior executives if they were trying to accomplish a purpose or if they were just trying to go after him and punish him. And this was quite shocking to everybody, including me. I hadn't planned to say this. This is just what came out. It's like being on the school bus. You don't like to see somebody else picked on.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like them. So it was very shocking. And the two executives were taken aback, and it broke up the conversation, and they called an end to the meeting, and the guy and I left. And I went home that evening not knowing what would happen when I came back the next morning. Because I was, how might you say it, out of line. I was definitely out of line. And I got back the next morning, and the two women called me in. And they told me how inappropriately I had behaved. And I apologized because I know my behavior was inappropriate in terms of hierarchy and deference to seniors. And it certainly wasn't the kind of thing that people are supposed to say. And so I apologized. I did not back down, but I apologized for behaving in a way that wasn't appropriate. What I took from that, first of all, I was so lucky. I was really lucky. And part of why I was lucky, honestly, is because I had always done a very good job and I knew all kinds of stuff and how to run certain parts of the business, and the business needed me. So it wasn't like it would be easy for them to just fire me.
Right.
Normally, somebody who did what I did, they might have wanted to fire. I'm sure they did want to fire me. But they couldn't do it. And so in a weird way, what I learned then was that because of the combination of my good performance and my willingness to challenge, in a sense, from a moral perspective, that I had power in the situation that they didn't have. Now, this guy was messing up terribly. And in fact, he was fired only a few weeks after that because he really had done poorly and had lied to cover it. And so he had to be gone. It wasn't wrong to fire him. He could have been helped differently. He might have been salvageable. Hard to know. But forever after, while I was in that company, there were things that didn't happen when I was in the room. There were things that people wouldn't say. There were behaviors that wouldn't happen. Because people don't want to be confronted, generally. Did that make it less scary? Other times I had to confront people? No. But it was a real lesson in being willing to take the risk to stand up.
Powerful. In your story or what you just shared, a couple of things that jumped out at me, and I wanted to talk about it. Number one, you mentioned expectations of success. And so I'm thinking, can we say, or is it safe to say that expectation of success in a way helps you manage conflict? Like, or does it help you reduce the impact of conflict?
So I'm going to say, I'll sound just like a consultant. It depends. If you are relatively self-aware and And as I was, if you are already competent, then it may. But we all know people who are not that great at their jobs, but think they're fantastic,
Right.
or at least pretend to themselves that they're fantastic. And when those people have expectation of success, it is a way of shutting out what's really happening.
Right. Right.
So when we are talking about human behavior and interpersonal dynamics like this, it is very rare for there to be one formula that works for everybody.
Hmm. So can we say, you know, is
Said
there
that
is there anything like low expectation of success or high expectation of success?
So in general, low expectation of success often means you won't try that hard,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not great, but you can't force yourself to have high expectations of success. When you do that, that's like bravado. Oh, it's going to be great.
Hmm.
I know it's going to be great. Now, you can do affirmations, you can build yourself up, you can do experiments, you can see what happens. And you can teach yourself over time through skillful practice to actually be more successful and therefore anticipate your own success. If I were going to give you a kind of formula, I'm trying to make sure that this is not just only for me, but this would work generally.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the best things you can be is truly curious,
Hmm.
because that means you are paying attention both to yourself and to others, and you are wondering, how did this get to be this way? How did we get here? What has happened before? What are the other people's expectations? How can I navigate this situation that is really before me, whatever my expectations are? Curiosity has been one of my greatest gifts, and I try to teach it to my clients, because if you can think about alternative motivations, alternative reasons for why things aren't working, the fact that you permit yourself to think more things, you can also come up with more potential solutions.
Solutions. That's right. That's right. And I think you better manage conflict that way, because you already have some thought out alternatives of how things should work based
Yeah.
on a given project or something. Okay, great, great. To pick on what you also said, you mentioned around purpose or punishment. So let's say, I wanted to talk about that in terms of leaders or managers who, trying to manage conflict. Now, oftentimes you see that people prioritize punishment and feel like, okay, well, the only way to do this is to, get rid of the person or do something. But you mentioned something very important around the fact that, what is the purpose here? Like, are we focused on the issue or the person, right? So talk to us about how to make that balance of purpose and punishment.
Good question. Um, I like to say the person is not the problem is the problem,
Hmm.
because the person is carrying the problem, brings it into the room, um, but even if you eliminated that person, there would still be some kind of problem sitting there. So if you can look at the problem itself, then you have a chance of getting the person to want to help you with the problem instead of attacking them, in which case, I'm sure you've seen this 100 times, sometimes the person tries to protect the problem if they feel attacked,
Right.
even though they don't want the problem, because we defend what belongs to us and we defend the positions we have taken in the past, even if they were not successful. Otherwise, it means self-questioning. Have I been wrong all this time?
Right. Let's talk about performance. You also mentioned performance and power, and how, because we see that all the time, that people in conflict oftentimes leverage their performance, based on what they have done, or their power. So talk to us around that fact. Like, is it safe to say that, when it comes to conflict, leveraging your performance should be the way to go rather than power?
What strikes me, there are ways in which I have a slightly contrarian nature. So I always want to sort of say the opposite. Yes, if you can say, look at these results, they are evidence, they are data that says that the course of action that I am proposing will bring us other good results. And so you should trust me and we should go in that direction, as opposed to I'm going to force you. That would be a way that performance could be the tool that you use to address the conflict. But I'm going to give you a situation in which performance is as bad as power, raw power. It often happens that a company will hire an executive because of their past track record, their performance somewhere else, with the belief that this successful performance applied to the situation we have here will give us successful performance. But there are executives who come in and they are not curious, and they do not see, is this the same situation I worked in before, or is it different? They just, sometimes it's called running their playbook. They just do the things they've done before. They have this track record of performance, and so they may try to cut through a conflict by saying, I know the way, I have the answer, but they might be wrong because they have not fully assessed the situation. So I'm wary of claims of performance. It's different from observing it and therefore having trust and confidence that this particular leader knows what they're doing.
Right.
I'm also going to say there are times where power is exactly the right thing in a conflict. Sometimes a senior person has to say to two members of their team, look, people, this is on me as the person with the responsibility. I am saying we are going in direction B, not direction A. So please stop arguing with each other. I am calling this shot. You don't want to do that too often. You want the people whose work it is to figure out how to collaborate on their own. But if time is short, or there's an emergency, or a big customer is very unhappy, sometimes the responsible thing is for the person with the power to cut through, establish the right behavior for right now, this minute, and then come back to it and say, what can we learn from this situation? How can we go forward in a better way?
Right. That's a food for thought. But let's flip it now to the individuals who are on the team right now. How can they manage that performance and power play when it comes to conflict? Can they also, I know, leveraging power might not be the case because you have a leader and all, but how can they use performance to their advantage when they're in a time of conflict?
Let me give you a kind of traditional example. If you think in most companies how the sales function and the operations or production function often are in a kind of tug of war because they actually want somewhat different things. The sales function wants to please customers. Whatever makes the client happy, we do it any way they like it. They get rewarded for bringing in more business, keeping business. Okay? So that's customer happiness, what appears to be customer happiness. In production or operations, the whole issue in general is efficiency. So we don't want to do special things for customers. We want to do things the way we know we can do it cost effectively, accurately, quickly, no trouble. So if I'm in operations, I'm going to be very aggravated with my colleague in sales who has agreed to customize things in ways that I know are going to make big problems. Our jobs are structured, if they are typical, to have us be in conflict. In fact, our compensation may be in conflict. So we're motivated all the time to maintain the conflict. Getting people in those kinds of roles to sit down together and talk about what is the best solution long term and who are the stakeholders that it is most important to satisfy. What are our values here? Who are we truly trying to serve? And what do we say about the way we do business and how we perform? And can we use those values as a guide to figuring out what the right solution is? Sometimes it's going back to the customer and saying, sorry, we can't do it. Sometimes it's going back to the customer and saying, we can do it, but it will take longer and it will cost more. Is that what you want? Sometimes it means making a new investment in production capabilities, because we realize, oh, if we can do that for this customer, we can do it for other customers, and that will be fantastic. So it actually means broadening the discussion, not just this specific customer at this time, but what is our purpose here? I think out of the different things you've asked me, purpose is a better guide than either performance or power.
That's right. I was going to say that. Yes, yes. And that's reality. That's life in general. Because if we align based on purpose, I think the company will be fine. The world will be a better place, right? Because we see a lot. You know, the troubles we have in the workplace is because people are aligning based on performance and power, but not based on purpose. Because I mean, the reason why we exist, or the company exists, is to serve, is to help people, right? So if we come from the place of purpose, then we can see a lot of conflict, you know, go away. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Now, there's a study that says that, you know, 89% of employees let conflict escalate with their coworkers. 12% quit their job in total. Another 10% of workers avoid going to meetings. And 9% don't come to work for multiple days, but because of conflict. So what would you say are the common causes, you know, based on your experience, of conflict, and why do they arise?
I think one of the biggest contributors to conflict is lack of clarity from the top down about what is purpose, about what are our plans, what are we trying to accomplish here? And then you cascade that down. Who have we assigned to be responsible for which aspects of our work? Who actually has control? Who gets to make which decisions? When those things are not clear, people get into fights all the time, because most people want to do a good job. They want to do well, whether it's for the customers or the shareholders or the world. They want to do well. But when it is not clear how people are evaluated for performance, or what the plans and goals are and how those translate given people's different jobs, then people don't really know what to do and they just follow their instincts. This is what the responsibility of leadership is, to translate the goals into what that means for each individual.
Hmm. So how can we then get to the place of clarity? Because, yeah, clarity is a lot of work sometimes.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
how can we get to the place of clarity, both as leaders and also as employees? Because sometimes, leaders will do the job of explaining the goals, having strategic meetings and stuff, but still sometimes we don't get clarity. So how can we then, what are the, if you had to give a guideline or tools to gain clarity, what would you say?
So when I work with mid-level leaders, one of the things we talk about is what kinds of questions it makes sense to ask your boss. Often, clarity comes not because the senior leader is great at providing it, but because the person the next level down is willing to do, you were exactly right, the work. It's tiring. It takes time. And it means going back to your boss and saying, okay, boss, here's my understanding of what this means, what that big meeting meant. It means I'll be taking care of these things, and my colleague over here, I believe, will need to take care of those things. Is that right? And have you communicated that to my colleague? Can we have a meeting together so we make sure we're all on the same page? There is a lot of relationship management
Hmm.
that goes into creating clarity. There is a lot of one-on-one time, up, down, and sideways, to make sure that everyone understands what's supposed to happen.
Hmm.
Most of the time at work, I'm making up a number. Do people really know? No, most of the time they don't, or a lot of the time. I mean, part of the way I can earn a living is because executives don't communicate that well to each other,
Hmm.
often because they have not thought through the ramifications, the natural conclusions of what they say their strategies and goals are. They think about the big picture or they think about the desired results, but they don't actually think through what it takes to get there.
Right there. Hmm. Can we also say that one of the major factors for lack of clarity can be the big guy we talk about a lot, ego? Because I've seen places where, okay, we're in a meeting, we're having a huddle, we're having a stand out, whatever you call it, group meetings, and we're having conversations around our goal. But here you have people who, after the meeting is done, they begin to ask questions from their colleagues. Like, do you understand what was said there? Sometimes I ask, why didn't you ask the questions in the room so that you can get more clarity? So either ego or fear. So how can we then address ego and fear to gain clarity?
Okay, I'm so happy with you because you went to the place I was going to go. Ego is not the issue. It's the flip side. It's the fear.
Hmm.
It is because of the fear that you see the ego manifested. When people are not afraid, they don't have to assert in the same way. When people are not afraid, they don't have to hide and ask their questions after. Sometimes it's right to ask your questions after. If it's a big meeting,
Right.
you shouldn't be asking detailed questions about how that affects you in the big meeting. It might be embarrassing to you,
Hmm.
and it's probably not helpful to the purpose of the meeting, but you do need to ask if you don't know, even if you should know. If you don't know, you need to ask because you don't want to screw up,
Right.
and nobody else wants you to screw up either. But it's fear. As humans, we are always afraid of being found wanting. Not effective enough, not smart enough, not skillful enough, not results oriented enough, all of the things. You can make tremendous lists. Why are we afraid? Because what's theoretically the worst thing that could happen? They don't want you here anymore. They tell you you can't come back to work. I can't tell you how many companies I have done assessments where I ask all kinds of questions about how things work here. And people talk about someone, quote, getting in trouble. Oh, you'll get in trouble if you talk about this, don't do that, etc. I'm not talking about junior people. I'm talking about people with some authority. Getting in trouble. What does that mean? Does that mean they fire people here? No, they actually should fire more people. They keep people who aren't competent. People build up in their minds this idea that others will be unhappy with me, dissatisfied with me. If I raise the problem, everyone in the room will look at me in a strange way. They won't share information with me anymore. I'll be shunned. I'm dramatizing this.
Yeah.
This is not exactly how the conversation goes. But the idea that I will put myself at risk is very, very strong. Let somebody else speak up. I don't need to be the one to do it. I'll just keep my head down and keep doing my work. I'll ask my friend later instead of going to my boss. I don't want my boss to be mad. So all of these are avoidance of risk kinds of maneuvers. People keep themselves quiet. Senior people have no idea the great level of questioning, concerns, distress going on underneath. They think everything's fine. There's loads of research showing complete divergence in the beliefs of senior people from the beliefs of junior people about what's really happening in the organization. It's in a weird way as if everyone is conspiring to put no problems on the table because of the hard work you talked about before.
So how? Because I'm more concerned about the individual in that whole equation. So what can they do? Because if no one is willing to take the risk, I believe that's going to impact them in the long run. So
Correct.
for them to be able to grow in terms of personally and professionally, what can they do in that situation so that they can be in a better place where they're able to be more assertive or speak up? What can they do in that scenario?
Let's think of it in a kind of set of concentric circles, maybe working from the inside out. If I start with myself, what do I think is happening here? What are my actual concerns? Not just this vague concern, I'll be in trouble. What do I actually think will happen? If I do this, what do I think the consequences will be? How plausible is it that that's actually true?
True.
Okay, so starting there, let me figure out what's worth a little risk, what's really not worth risk. Have I seen anybody in trouble for this kind of thing before? Okay, let me figure out my situation. Then, what's the lowest risk way for me to get some help? It's probably asking a colleague, which is what you were describing before. So who are my good colleagues? Who are the people I can trust here? Now, this is an interesting, each of these topics you've raised, we could talk about for an hour.
For an hour, yeah.
So have I established relationships of trust that I can draw upon? There's always a backstory
Right.
that has to be considered before you take action. But for most people, they have decent relationships with at least a couple of colleagues. So then you can ask your colleague, what have you done in the situation I'm in? Is there a history that you know about that you can share with me? How do you think our boss will respond if I go and ask whatever it is? So that's a kind of two heads are better than one. Maybe we can role play, figure out some situations and scenarios. Another thing to consider is, do I have friends outside the organization who are in similar roles to mine? Maybe they've faced something similar. And then to think about, okay, I really need to go see my boss. What do I know about the best way to have a conversation with my boss? And if you've been there more than a month, you may already know things like, don't bother her in the morning until she's had at least 2 cups of coffee. That's just not smart, right? She's in a good mood after lunch or after the weekly meeting is done or whatever. So that's a good time. Does she like to be addressed if you stop by her office, if you call her on the phone, if you email her? What are the ways that she responds well? Use that method. Don't use your favorite, use her favorite.
Yeah.
How does she want to be presented with the situation? Some people want a conversation. Some people want data right away. They won't talk to you without data. Do you need to do a PowerPoint? Know the ways to present the situation. There are executives, for example, if you can't give them pages and pages of statistics, they treat you like you don't know anything. There are others, they say they want the statistics, but what they really want is the story, because it's the story about the customer who was upset or the customer we could get that is compelling to them. Know the turf you are walking on.
Right.
So going back to your earlier point, Emeka, this is so much work. You can't just do it on the fly. I mean, you can do it on the fly, and a lot of times it'll be fine. But if you're really worried and you're trying to eliminate your own fear, yes, you treat this like a big deal, not because it's dangerous, but because it's complex, because human beings and organizations are complex. And so you have to meet the situation as it is.
Okay, great points you've listed here. I'm just going to do a recap for those who didn't catch it. And to be able to manage, conflict, you mentioned things like, number one, being able to read the room or read the situation or read whosoever is involved around that conflict and see what the best way to be able to approach them. Establish trust in advance, right? So that's why, I always tell people that be ready for war when this in times of peace. Not to use the word war, but means begin to build those relationships before you need them. Establish trust so that when you have situations like this, you can draw upon those emotional accounts that you've trust you have invested in over the years or over the month. Also develop the art of storytelling, just in case the people you're trying to address or meet, or your executives or your boss, loves to hear stories around what exactly is going on. Develop the ability to also work with data. I know a lot of times we run away from data, and sometimes we need to get those skills, because that's how we'll be able to have an edge to address conflict. So this is a great point. And now I want to take one of the things you mentioned around communication and talk about how can we become more effective communicator to resolve conflict. I know these are very huge topics, but in a short, few highlights here, how can we become effective communicators?
The first thing is to get really clear in your own mind that the trickier the situation is, the less it's about you and the more it's about them.
Hmm.
Understanding them, listening to them, being aware of their circumstances. That ties back to everything you said before about understanding the situation you're in, because the other person can shut you down very fast. You could keep talking, but if they are not listening, you're done.
Hmm.
Stopped. So the ability to be with them in relationship, having concern for them, their goals, their concerns, and having them recognize that you see the two of you as a team, even more than you see them as antagonists. That's incredibly valuable. If you operate that way, most small conflicts will get worked out pretty easily.
Right.
And it means, just like the preparation you talked about before, when it comes to a big one, you already have mutuality of interest. A really useful, I don't know if it's a philosophy, it's a stance, is something that I try to get clients to say to themselves, I care about what you care about because you care about it. Has nothing to
Hmm.
do with if I think you're wrong, if I want something else. But if I can't put myself in that position of caring, I'm not understanding you well enough to figure out how to convince you.
Hmm.
I'm not as persuasive. So I want to make a big pitch for compassion,
Hmm.
which is about having the understanding so that you can then take action. It's not just understanding for understanding's sake. It's not just empathy. There's a lot of discussion about empathy and we have to have empathy for the other person, and I agree. But we don't want to feel what the other person is feeling. We want to understand what they're feeling. And that is as true whether you are in a conflict or whether you are the one really trying to help someone, which as a senior leader, so I'm flipping this on you a little bit, but for senior leaders, the ability to understand what the people on your team need, even if it's about some home problem that to you doesn't seem very important, doesn't seem to affect the business. Understanding your team members is one of the best things you can do to reducing the amount of conflict that will occur amongst your team members.
Hmm. Hmm.
I know I threw too many things in there.
Yeah, I like that phrase you said. As I care about what you care about because you care about it. Did I get it right?
Yes, that's it.
But so those are three layers there. So not just caring about what the person care about, not just caring for the person or caring about the person, but caring about the fact that they care about something. So that's something that goes at a deeper level. And yeah, it will definitely bring out people and make people more open to receiving what you have to say.
That's right.
Hmm.
That's right.
Let's change the conversation a little bit around, is there anything like positive conflict? And why I say this is because a study shows that in a workplace, 76% of workers worldwide have seen a conflict lead to something positive. 41% of them found that it led to a better understanding of other people. 3% experienced improved working relationships, and 29% even found a better solution to their problem or challenges. So can we say that there's anything like positive conflict? And how can we change conflict that seems to be negative to become positive?
I would say the issue is the context in which we hold the idea of conflict.
Hmm.
For most people, conflict is negative because they believe that conflict means we are not getting along. But there are some people who thrive on conflict,
Hmm.
who love the back and forth, the tangle. They think of it as exciting. their juices are going. This is how we can have more ideas, because we are in a kind of excited frame of mind, heightened awareness. And if we can be in that together, that's great for work. Most people do not call it conflict unless it upsets them. If it's just differences of opinion, preferences, taste, working out the fact that we have different schedules, they don't think of it necessarily as a conflict. They just think it's a conversation. We have to get it figured out. It's the context that matters so much.
Right.
Research does show that having differences of opinion, this is part of why you want different kinds of people.
Yeah.
Yes, because differences of opinion make solutions stronger. They identify different forms of risk. These are all ways that you can get better results. If conflict makes you feel, though, that others are against you, then most people go into a kind of threat response. And you have fight, flight, freeze kinds of things, and they don't work well for innovation and creativity. So again, it's about knowing the people you're with, or figuring out how to make the conflict safe, even for people who feel under threat.
That's right. So how can leaders create an environment that, and I know we've touched on this at some point we've discussed, but how can leaders practically create an environment where people are free to communicate and free to be able to address conflict, so that we can, have a very, healthy environment to work?
You use the word free, and I'm going to suggest that that's not the best word, because often people feel that being free means they can do anything. A leader who creates safe structures, processes, environments in which to hold disagreements, because the context is that disagreeing is good for the business, will do better than someone who says, just be yourselves, do it any way that works for you. Creating norms about how we handle this kind of situation here, that we are all committed to the good outcome, that we're committed to caring about each other, and modeling that. It is take simple case. What does the leader do when they disagree with the subordinate? Do they listen? Do they say, that's interesting, let's think about it? Do they say, let me show you where the data contradicts your point of view and let's look at it together, which is exhausting and time consuming? Or do they say, no, wave their hand, shake their head, go back to their computer, and basically toss the person out of their room? How the leader deals with disagreement themselves sets the tone for the rest of the team. So listening carefully, being curious about what's going on, and showing the subordinate, we have a disagreement. Here's how we're going to figure it out together. The idea of working on this together, that we are collaborating in this conflict, takes it out of the negative context for conflict for people who are afraid of conflict. For people who think they like fighting, there are some people who think they like fighting. They like to throw a grenade in and see what happens. For those people, they can think, this is going to be a little boring. But when they see that they still get to have a hearty expression of their views, they usually are okay too.
Yeah, great. Can you mention some red flags that indicate that a conflict might escalate beyond, if not addressed early? What are the red flags that you can see, to know that this conflict might escalate if not addressed promptly?
In some ways, by the time you see the red flags, it has already escalated. I'm going to use a practice that actually comes from marriage counseling. There's a fellow, John Gottman, who has done significant research in how marriages work. And he talks about what are called bids for attention, and that there are different kinds of responses that people give. When someone makes a bid, tries to talk to you, tries to approach you, do you turn toward them? Oh, that's interesting. We'll talk about it. Turn away from them. I don't really have time to do that. Or turn against them. That's ridiculous. If you start to see a lot of turning away and turning against, you know you are in a situation of escalation where positions may have hardened. What you want to see is a lot of, oh, you disagree? Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, you want to accomplish something else? Let's talk about it a different way. You want to see people engaging. If you see disengagement or attack, big red flags. The other thing to look for is, how do I put this? Anything that looks like the same person is always going to win. And for this, I'm going to give you an example from parenting. Many parents, when there are kids who are having a conflict, tell them to go to their room and work it out. That's not effective. The bigger, stronger, or smarter one will always win. They may not be the older one, but the one who knows how to navigate that circumstance is the most likely to win, and that will become a pattern. And the same things happen at work. You can't just send two colleagues away and tell them to work at it. If they are coming to you as the leader, it's because they don't know how to work at it. So it's your responsibility to help them work on it and to facilitate so that when one of them is speaking, making a bid, you are supporting the other in turning toward them to try to work it out. This is very investment intense for the leader. Most leaders expect that they can say to a subordinate, that's your responsibility, go take care of it. I leave you to do it. That's why you have the job. That's fine when they're being successful. If they are not being successful and the leader does not intervene, the whole ensuing conflict and escalation is really the leader's response and not just the responsibility of the people who are in the conflict.
Wow, great point. I love the analogy with marriage and raising kids to address conflict. I think that's very powerful, especially the part of saying the kids to go, because that's what we see a lot in the workplace. Go sort yourself out and come back when you're done.
Yes.
And it doesn't get sorted out. You still see that people still have issues. So great point there. I'm gonna wrap things up. We have a final 3 questions that I ask my guest, and it's something around life in general, and just to get some good tips there from you. And these are the 3 questions. You can answer it in one word, or you can expatiate on the word. The first question is, if you were to write a book about your life, what would the title be?
Oh my goodness. I'm laughing to think. What comes up is I was very interested. It goes back to curiosity. I want to know. I want to know what works, what doesn't work, how to use it. Yeah, I think that's actually true.
That's a powerful title there. I was very interested. How curiosity saved my life.
or made my life,
Or made my life.
right?
Wow. Great one. Great one. Second question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received, and how has it influenced your life and career?
The best piece.
Yeah, the best piece of advice you've ever received.
I think it was that you have to treat everybody as who they are, that we are not all the same, that we don't react the same to things, and you have to take that into account.
Account. Yeah, that's true. Great point. Last question. If you could magically acquire one new language overnight, which would you choose and why?
A new language.
Yes.
Uh, I'm going to say Spanish
I
because,
guess as much. I knew you were going to say Spanish. I don't know why.
okay, um, so I live in New York. Um, there are many, many people who speak Spanish, and it would be so helpful for understanding more people in their native tongue. And certainly in the US, there are so many people in workplaces whose first language is Spanish. Yeah, that's the one I would pick.
Great, great. Okay, thank you so much for your time here on the show, Liz. It was such a pleasure. I know this is kind of conversation that you don't have in an hour or less, but I know that you're able to give so much value in the short time that we have. Thank you so much for being a part of this show. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, please leave a comment about our conversation today. If you have a question for Liz, we're going to leave all communication details or contact details or websites and how to stay in touch with Liz on the show notes or also on the podcast notes as well. Thank you so much, Liz. It was a pleasure having you again, having you on the show, and hope that when next we invite you again, you come on the show, because I know there's a lot for us to still unpack in this conversation. Thank you so much. Do you
It
have any
was a
last
real
words to say
pleasure.
to our audience?
It was a real pleasure, Emeka. We looked at so many different things and in interesting ways. And there's a free ebook on my website about the interpersonal aspects of conflict and some of the conversational aspects that may be helpful to people.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Do you have any final words you want to say?
Um, I think in the things that we talked about, which are so meaningful to people every day at work, curiosity, compassion, very little is hopeless. If
Hmm.
you're still there may be something else you can do to make your situation better.
Hmm.
And so actively thinking about that and not losing hope is very important.
Wow. That's a powerful way to wrap it up. Not losing hope. The very little is hopeless. That's so powerful. And I know this would be a word for someone who's going to be watching or listening, that all hope is not lost. It could even be your family. It could be, a work. All hope is not lost. There's still room. There's still opportunity to make things right, to fix it, to make it work. Wow. Thank you so much, Liz. It was such a powerful piece of advice to end the show. Remember, once again, for those of our listeners across the world, that your growth is personal. Anything, no matter how much you be in a community or groups of, coaching programs, your growth is personal. Once you take personal responsibility for your growth, you won't see any growth, right? So remember that as we wrap things up in our show today. Thank you for being a part of our show, watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify. Please keep giving us that rating, keep liking the podcast episode, so that those who don't know about this podcast will get to know and see it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.